Hey everybody, we got a special guest today. We've been really looking forward to this. We're gonna hang out and talk about Bible prophecies. So it's gonna be pretty cool. We got a bunch of things we're gonna talk about, but that's the main one. That's the title thing. So we're gonna get into it. I'm Bentley. And this is the Book Talk. Justin from Deconstruction Zone, man. How you doing?
Great. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to getting to talk about what might be my favorite topic.
Oh no shit, really? The Bible prophecies?
Yeah, because when I was a Christian, I thought the Bible prophecies were like the smoking gun for Christianity. And then when I really got acquainted with the text, it turns out that it was the Achilles heel, not the smoking gun. So
No shit. That's funny because I was just gonna say like that was like my whole bag too. Like I was just like, but the prophecies though, that was like the main thing I would say. And when people would ask me like, okay, well, what was the prophecy and how do you know it? Like proved it or whatever, and I'm just like, I don't know, but there was a bunch of them that were proven. I've heard people say that, so it's got to be, yeah, dude. It's not,
right.
not great. But first, real quick, I wanted to ask you, and I kind of wanted to get into this just immediately because it was kind of the buzz for a minute here. And, a lot of people go on Joe Rogan that are wrong. And I'd kind of like to see somebody go on there who's right. And we saw like Wes Huff just recently went on there. So my real question is, when are you going to go on Joe Rogan?
Well, I'm still waiting for Joe Rogan to reach out. I might have to. I have to get more famous before he cares about my existence, but we'll see. I'm trying. I just got on YouTube recently, about a year ago, so I'm starting to put out videos and build my online presence. But I suspect that eventually he's going to have some counter apologists on there. But my guess is, and this is just a guess, is he'll probably prefer somebody with a PhD. But luckily, there are a lot of people with PhDs in this field of study that would love to come on Joe Rogan and correct the mistakes of Wes Huff. So if it's not me, it might be somebody else. It could be Kip Davis. It could be Josh Bowen. There's a lot of qualified people that have studied the Hebrew Bible in depth that can go on the show and give a pretty swift correction.
Okay. Yeah. And this is like, here's what happened. I'm going to pull this up real quick. Hold on. Let me see. Switch screens here. So what happened was which one is this? Okay, so Wes Huff was in a debate with Billy Carson, this dude right here. Right. And then this moment was the moment that I guess got him on the show. Right. So here we go.
According to the Sinai Bible, Jesus wasn't crucified in that Bible.
Do you mind if I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
When you say the Sinai Bible, what are you referring to specifically? Refer to the Sinai Bible. Would you be referring to Codex Sinaiticus, like the codex that comes? Okay, that's why I was trying to get some clarification, because I actually have a facsimile. So I have a photocopy of Codex Sinaiticus that I work with in my office. So I have it here. And the only reason I asked for clarification is because Sinaiticus in particular is just a 4th century Greek manuscript. Its text of the Gospels reads almost identical to the modern Greek text that we develop translations from.
Okay, so that was it. He reached behind him, right, and grabbed the thing, grabbed his copy, right. And it's funny because like I watch your channel a lot, right, and it always kills me like the way that you'll do the TikTok point, right. It's just like this point thing, the TikTok, and you do it in real time though, where they're just like, okay, the Bible, the Bible says this, and you're like, oh, you mean this verse right up here, check it out, like in real time. And it reminds me of something like that, like pulling the shit just from right behind you. You just got it floating above your head because you're already ready for it. How do you do all that shit? How do you get it like so fast?
Well, that's a good question. And I tell you what, so my live streams and my debates, I typically do topics that are in my wheelhouse. I try not to debate people on topics that aren't my area of specialty, right? So, and this was good advice that somebody gave me back when I was in high school. The first time I ever had to like preach a sermon, I was like terrified. And I was like, I don't know what to what words should come out of my mouth. And my youth pastor at the time said something really good that I never forgot. He said, just talk about what you know. Say something that you're confident about. And so that's what I do with, most of my online presence as well. Like I try to stick to the topics that I know. That way, when I speak, not only do I know it because it's already in my head, but I can also go to my resources and I can tell you, oh, well, this is how I know it. This is where I got it from. And these are the scholars that agree with my opinions. And so it's not that I have this vast knowledge, that at my fingertips. It's more or less that I've tried pretty well to stick to my area of specialty and try not to go out of it. So, for example, I've got lots of critical editions of the Hebrew Bible, and I've got copies of the Dead Sea Scrolls and various manuscripts that I can pull off the shelf. But my area of expertise is not in the Greek New Testament. So, like, for example, if you want to talk about, okay, is the longer ending of Mark 16 in the earliest Greek manuscripts, and when did they start showing up? Like, I could do that. I could have that conversation. Okay. But as it turns out, like I would have to do a deeper dive into it, since I've spent most of my time studying the Old Testament. I couldn't just pull it off a shelf and show you. But that's the strength that Wesley Huff brings to the table, is he did study the New Testament. He does know some of this stuff. The problem is he keeps making mistakes.
Right. I've heard.
Yeah.
Okay. So, because one of the mistakes that I wanted to bring up to you, because I've heard, okay, I'm trying to think of now what it was. It was Isaiah was word for word from 1,000 years prior, which already
certainly it's not. My
bullshit meter's just already, yeah. Okay. So already I'm like, I don't know, man, that sounds like fucking bullshit. But so I also saw that Alex O'Connor had brought that up, and then a bunch of other people were kind of responding to him saying that, oh man, you're just being overly critical and stuff like that. So, like, where is the line there? Like, is it how fact is it? I'm just curious.
I want to show you something. Give me a second. I'm going to send something to present real quick.
Okay. Yeah, let me remove it,
because I think it'd be helpful for what we're talking about.
Cool.
Okay, so I sent something to show. This is a document. Let's see. Okay. It's actually not showing what's on my screen. Let me reopen it.
Oh,
because it's showing what is underlying my screen, but it's not showing the actual text.
Oh, okay. I feel you. Sometimes goes to the screen behind it.
Yeah, sorry about that. Let me just open it up actually in my PDF reader and see if it'll show it then. Okay. So I'll unpresent this real quick, and then I'll present it. I'll tell it to change screens. All right, I think it should be displaying here. Give me a second to make sure you can see it. 1 second, let me find it. Sorry about this. I was just thinking about this. There we go.
Oh, cool.
So this is a really interesting volume. It was done by Eugene Ulrich. He was a scholar from Notre Dame who studied the Dead Sea Scrolls extensively, and he wrote a lot of books on the Dead Sea Scrolls. But this particular volume here is really good because he actually shows you the textual variants that are in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So let me go to probably about where Isaiah is showing up. Okay, so now there's Isaiah. There we go. We'll just jump down to Isaiah 38 here. So in the actual text, he's listing all the variants, and you can see that a lot of these are in the Masoretic text, as labeled in the subsection of variants. And so just in chapter 38 alone, there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And so literally every page of Isaiah, we can find where the Dead Sea Scrolls are diverging from the actual Masoretic text. But look at all the breaks in the Dead Sea Scrolls. See how we keep having these vacancies, and we keep having like spots where the text isn't even filled in. That's because
right.
what we have in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they're not actually complete, right? So to say that, you know, the Dead Sea Scrolls confirmed that there was a word for word copy from, you know, from the Masoretic text isn't necessarily true. And we do have a copy of the Great Isaiah Scroll. That's 1Q Isaiah 8 that appears to be mostly complete. But even with that, if you compare 1Q Isaiah A, there's many differences to the actual Masoretic text, which is why scholars typically, I'll show you real quick. Scholars typically refer to the Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia, which he mispronounced in his live stream because he's never actually used it.
That's
and in the Biblia Hebraica, there's a critical apparatus at the bottom of it that shows all the textual variants that could be considered for the actual Hebrew text that's being translated. And then you've also got the notes from the actual Masoretics as well. So the fact of the matter is, anyone who studied the manuscripts of the Hebrew Bible knows that the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Masoretic texts, there's lots of divergencies. There's passages that are completely missing. There's passages that were added later. And you know, what we have in the Masoretic text that's been handed down to us is not completely clear if it was what was retained in the Dead Sea Scrolls completely. And it's also, there's divergencies as well in the Greek manuscripts. If you read the Greek Septuagint and compare it to the Hebrew text, there's divergencies as well. So all that to say, you know, not to bore everyone with Greek and Hebrew, all that to say is like just a passing familiarity with the Hebrew text is all you need to know that there was not, you know, Isaiah was not a word for word copy in the Dead Sea Scrolls as it was in the Middle Ages in like the Aleppo Codex or the Leningrad Codex.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was gonna say because like some of them were saying like, oh, it's just like it's like a spelling error. That's like what they kept saying as a correction. I was like, I don't think that's right, man. Like, I don't know. I'll have to ask. That's why, you know, I love having y'all on here so I can ask these questions.
Yeah, and some people have already gone through some of the more troubling differences. I think Alex O'Connor recently did a video showing how some of the passages were actually removed or added, and I know Myth Vision, I think, has gone over some of them as well. So all you need to do is, in fact, you can get yourself a copy. I've got one here. It's really cheap. At least I thought I had a copy. Get yourself a copy of the Dead Sea Scrolls Bible. That's the name of the book that I can never find on my shelf when I need it. Here it is.
Oh, there you go.
So just grab a Dead Sea Scrolls Bible, and
cool.
in it you've got an English translation of Isaiah from what is found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And in this particular English translation, so if you can't read Hebrew, this will still give you all of the textual variants from the various manuscripts, right? So you don't have to have a critical edition of the Hebrew. You can actually use this, the Dead Sea Scrolls Bible. And guess who else is participating in this project? Eugene Ulrich, as he's the guy who did Biblical Qumran Scrolls. So these three scholars, Peter Flint, Martin Ebeg, and Eugene Ulrich, they're phenomenal scholars who's spent countless number of hours studying the Dead Sea Scrolls. So that's a really good resource for people who can read English, but they can't read Hebrew. And they just want to know, hey, what does it actually say in the Dead Sea Scrolls? And are there divergencies?
Right. Yeah. Because, well, I remember that was like when I was growing up, I remember everybody would talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls being like, oh, no, it verified everything. That's how we know like what we believe is true, you know? And I wasn't honestly, again, like back then, I didn't know like what it was or anything, but I would cite it, you know, because again, that's like what you do. You just pretend to know stuff. And just out of curiosity, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, did it have Daniel? Was that included, Joel?
Yeah, there was some Daniel in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And one of the most interesting things, too, is in the Dead Sea Scrolls, we've got some Greek fragments of Daniel as well. And we've got some additional Daniel lore that doesn't show up in the Bible. So Daniel is like this growing tradition. Like they keep adding to the book of Daniel. which is why if you get a Bible that's got the Apocrypha, so I've got the New Oxford Annotated Bible here that includes the apocryphal works. And in the apocryphal works, you're actually going to find that there is a couple additions to Daniel. And so there, you've got like, give me a second to find it real quick, see what they named it in the NRSV. So I think most people know Susanna, and most people know the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but there's actually additions to that story. And let's see what they're calling it in this Bible. They do go by various names. I think Bel and the Dragon is the most popular of the Daniel editions.
It's got a dragon. Oh, that's awesome. It's like History of Middle Earth is what it sounded like. That's awesome.
Yeah. So let's see here now. Oh yeah, there's the some other editions. You've got the Prayer of Azariah, the Prayer of Manasseh. That's an alphabetical list. Let me see. But yeah, the Song of the Three Jews is the one I was thinking of. So there's the Prayer of Azariah and the Song of the Three Jews. So we've got like these additions to the Daniel kind of lore that show up in the Apocrypha, and there's even more that show up in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And guess what shows up in the Dead Sea Scrolls? There's a really interesting text called the Prayer of Nabonidus. And in the Prayer of Nabonidus, we learned that Nabonidus is actually the character that Daniel is portraying when it talks about Nebuchadnezzar going mad and leaving his country for a period of 7 years and having his son stay back as co-regent, that's Belshazzar. Right, all of that actually was about Nabonidus originally, and it got changed in Daniel history to be about Nebuchadnezzar. But if you go to 4Q 242, you've got the Prayer of Nabonidus being told. And so like, if you wonder, like, how is it that, you know, Daniel is attributing this stuff to history that doesn't make any sense? Because Nebuchadnezzar didn't have a child named Belshazzar. Nebuchadnezzar didn't have a co-regent. He never left the kingdom. Where are we getting these ideas from? Oh, because originally it was actually about Nabonidus, and Nabonidus did have a son named Belshazzar. Nabonidus did get sick for a period of time and have to leave the country. Nabonidus did come into contact with Jews eventually and recognize that, you know, that they had a unique religion. So the Dead Sea Scrolls, when you look at Daniel, actually contradict what is in the Bible.
Really? Okay. That's fascinating, because that was
Pretty
the
wild.
book that was like the main book that I was using back then. I was using the Dead Sea Scrolls to validate what I thought was like the most kick-ass of all the prophecies of the four kingdoms, which I was like, it's in the Dead Sea Scrolls, man. So, you know, they you know, they told the future. It has all of the different kingdoms, and, you know, and like the medals and the stuff that represent, you know, those different nations in the statue. How does that one work? Because I am curious about that, because I've heard that it's like what you were just saying, that it was from different time periods, and there were like different languages is like that were kind of like updating, like, oh, this medal like represents this kingdom over here, but that was like after the fact. Am I right on that, or how did that work?
So you're right. You've kind of got two topics melded in with this question. The language is interesting because at the very beginning of Daniel, we've got a different language, right? So Daniel is written partly in Hebrew and partly in Aramaic. And it's kind of interesting that, you know, the parts that are written in Hebrew are like this Mishnaic Hebrew that was not really popularized until after the fall of the Greek Empire. And it's really interesting as well that it just happens to be dealing with stuff happening at the fall of the Greek Empire, not at the time of Daniel.
Oh,
but the empires that you bring up, almost all scholars agree. This is not something that scholars are really debating. Almost all scholars agree that the four kingdoms are Babylon, and then Media, and then Persia, and then Greece. And in fact, in most good academic study Bibles, they'll literally just tell you this. They'll tell you who the kingdoms are and why that is the case. And here's an interesting note from the New Oxford Annotated Study Bible. It says the other kingdoms, although not named, are Media, the silver, Persia, the bronze, and Greece, iron and clay. The fourfold pattern of kingdoms appear also in the Sibylline oracles, oracle number 4, Babylonian and Greek writings, and listen to this, and also in the Qumran scrolls, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the scroll that specifically he's referring to is 4Q Pseudo-Daniel. So in 4Q Pseudo-Daniel, we find an explanation of the 4 kings being Babylon, Media, Persia, and Greece. And even deeper is John J. Collins. So if you get John J. Collins's commentary on the book of Daniel, he actually documents not just in Jewish literature, but also in Greek and Roman literature, where they describe these 4 kingdoms as being 4 distinct kingdoms. It's not until a much later date, not until already way into the Christian period, did people start reading the 4th kingdom as Rome, and that Media and Persia would be the same kingdom. That's a modern convention.
Really? Okay. And didn't it say, it says in there what they represent, right? Like it's like these metals represent this kingdom, right? Like you said, that's in the Bible, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's
okay.
It's funny too, because it does get explicit. Like when you read Daniel chapter 8 and read Daniel chapter 9 and 10, there's always a last kingdom mentioned. And the last kingdom in those prophecies is always the kingdom of Greece. Greece is the shaggy goat, the last kingdom. And so like in Daniel 8:9, when it talks about the last kingdom, says the male goat is the king of Greece, and his great horn between its eyes is the first king. Cool. So easily enough, the last kingdom is the kingdom of Greece. What does it say about that? As for the horn that was broken, in place of which 4 others arose, 4 kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. That's the breakup after Alexander. So this last kingdom is very clearly Greece. And then we find the same thing in chapter 10. It says, I have come because of your words, but the prince of the kingdom of Persia opposed me 21 days. So Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me. I left him there with the prince of the kingdom of Persia. I have come to help you to understand what is to happen to your people at the end of the days, for there is further vision for the days. And then he talks later about having to do war against the prince of Greece. So there's never a mention of Rome anywhere in the text. Everything is about Greece. It says in verse 20, now I must return to fight against the prince of Persia, and when I am through with him, the prince of Greece will come. No, there's no prince of Rome. There's no prince of the Kittim. It's the prince of Greece.
Huh. Okay. Because I always hear that tied to like Revelation. Is that the one that's like supposedly tied to it's like the last kingdom of the 4 kingdoms is supposed to be the final kingdom, right? Is that some weird evangelical interpretation of it?
It really is. And you know, the New Testament needed, in order for Daniel to be fulfilled in some sort of a messianic or Christian era, it needed to move the final kingdom to Rome, because that was the time that they were writing, right? So what do? You know, they say, well, you know, if you ignore some of the passages that clearly state that the last kingdom is Greece, and you squint really hard and say that words don't mean words, well, then you can get to a place where you say, no, the 4th kingdom is actually going to be Rome. But it just is not really true. And Daniel chapter 9, kind of the proof text, right? Well, Daniel chapter 9, they have no idea what to do with it, because they'll get down to verses like 25 and 26, and they'll say, it mentions the Messiah, therefore it must be fulfilled in Jesus's time period, right? But
I see.
When you're reading it in context, it's not, right? It says 70 weeks are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, and to atone for iniquity, and bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. That's the new temple. And it says, know therefore and understand, from the time that the word went out to restore and to rebuild Jerusalem to the time of an anointed prince, there shall be 7 weeks. Now, this is interesting because in some Bibles, like the King James Bible and others, it'll say until the Messiah prince. Wait a minute. That's not what it actually says. It just says Mashiach Nahid in Hebrew, which means a anointed leader. It's not the, it'd be HaMashiach if it was the Messiah.
Oh,
So
right, because that just means the anointed, right? Like the Messiah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And listen to when it's going to happen, though, right? It says from the time that the word went out to restore and to rebuild Jerusalem. Now, that was 605 BCE. That was Jeremiah's prophecy as they were being carried away. Everything in Daniel chapter 9 is about the prophecy of Jeremiah coming true or not coming true. Because the prophet is sitting in like year 522, just 70 years, a little over 70 years after they were taken captive in Babylon. And the prophecy from Jeremiah doesn't seem to be coming true, because in chapter 25, Jeremiah says, after 70 years, you'll come back. And they're going to be completely restored. And it doesn't really appear that they've been completely restored in 522. So he's like, what's going on? And then he's like, well, I read in the law of Moses that all of the cursings of the law of Moses has come upon us. In verse 11, it says, all Israel has transgressed your law and turned aside, refusing to obey your voice. So the curse and the oath written in the law of Moses, the servant of God, have been poured out on us. And that's from Leviticus 26, where God says, and also Deuteronomy 28, if you do not turn back from me in your suffering, then I will multiply your afflictions by 7. Okay, so now Daniel's like, oh, it's not 70 years, it's 70 times 7. Our affliction is going to be for 490 years. So whatever, I know, right? So
wow. Yeah, geez.
Whatever is happening in Daniel chapter 9, it concludes after a maximum of 490 years after 605. Absolutely everything in Daniel chapter 9 has to happen before the year 115 if you're taking 490 years to be a straight linear time period. So you're off by Jesus by at least 111 years. Jesus wasn't born until about 4 BCE.
Right.
So
okay.
It doesn't work. You can't put Jesus in this text anywhere. And the first Messiah, the first anointed one that shows up only after the first week. That's 49 years. So Jesus didn't show up in the middle of the 6th century BCE, but that's who this is talking about. So they're like, okay, well, there's another anointed person in here. Let's see what it says, right? It says, after 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off. Oh my gosh, it must be Jesus.
Gotta be again. It's too similar.
But
anointed.
As long as you ignore the context, then yes, you can say it must be him, right? Ignoring the fact that Jesus actually was never anointed to begin with. He was never a priest. He was never a king. He was never actually anointed, which is a major problem. But most scholars read the 62 weeks and the first week as running parallel, meaning after the first week is over, you'll get the first anointed person. After 62 weeks, then you're actually going to get the next anointed person. Now, this is really interesting because if you take 62 weeks, right, that's a period of years, and just multiply that by 7, you get 434 years. Now, if you take the beginning of their affliction, which is where the counting starts in 605, and take a 434 off of it, you end up in the year 171. This is really important. Watch this, okay? It says, after 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and will have nothing, and the troops of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war and desolations are decreed. He will make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half of the week he will make sacrifices and offerings cease. This literally happened around 171. Antiochus Epiphanes IV rolled on into Jerusalem, took over the temple, made people cut off sacrifices and offerings. He exiled Onias III, that was the high priest, exiled him, killed him, put his brother Jason in place of him. And then he made a covenant with Jason for a period of about 3.5 years to end the sacrifices. And then after about 3.5 years, the Maccabeans revolted and they're like, we're not having this anymore. And so everything that's talking about here in Daniel chapter 9 is what happened to them under the rule of the Greeks. This is not about something happening later. So this prophecy terminates between 171 and 164. That's actually what's happening here. So to read Jesus into this is completely fallacious, and most academic resources will explain this pretty clearly. But if you talk to a typical pastor or you talk to like a preacher, they don't know any of this because they've not read the academic sources. They don't know anything from history. They've not read the book of Maccabees. They've not read Josephus. Maccabees explains this. I don't know if anyone's read Maccabees 1 and 2, but if you go to First Maccabees at the very beginning of the book, it describes everything in Daniel 9.
Really?
So at the very beginning, if you go to First Maccabees 1:20, it says, after subduing Egypt, Antiochus returned with 140 in the 143rd year. He went up against Israel and came to Jerusalem with a strong force, and he arrogantly entered the sanctuary and took the golden altar. And then it says in verse 25, he shed much blood and spoke with great arrogance. They keep describing him as being arrogant. That's interesting because in Daniel 7, verses 8 and 11, this evil person that arises from the last kingdom, what's it call him? It says that he was arrogant, speaking arrogant words, because it's Antiochus Epiphanes IV. And it says in verse 28, it says, even the land trembled for its inhabitants, and all the house of Jacob was clothed with shame. 2 years later, the king sent the cities of Judah a chief collector of tribute, and he came to Jerusalem with a large force, and deceitfully he spoke peaceable words to them. So he tried to form a covenant with them, just like it was described in Daniel chapter 9.
Wow.
But what actually happened? Well, what happened in verse 39, her sanctuary became desolate like a desert. Her feasts were turned into mourning, her Sabbaths into a reproach, her honor into contempt. And then it says in verse 41, then the king wrote this to the whole kingdom, that all should be one people, and they should give up their particular customs. And all the Gentiles accepted the command of the king. So this idea that this king is going to come in, he's going to end the sacrifices and offerings and whatnot, it actually happened. And then what about the abomination that desolates?
That's
verse 40.
Yeah. Okay. That's so wild.
Listen to verse 48 and 54. 48 says, and to leave their sons uncircumcised, they were to make themselves abominable by everything clean and profane, so that they would forget the law and change all the ordinances. And then in 54, talking about what transpired, it says, now in the 50th day of Kislev, in the 145th year, they erected a desolating sacrilege on the altar of burnt offering. Everything in Daniel chapter 9 came true under Antiochus Epiphanes IV, and you can read about it in the Apocrypha. You can read about it in Jewish histories. You can read about it in Josephus and elsewhere.
And that's what they're waiting on right now, is to happen specifically right now because of everything that's going on. But wow, that's crazy. I had no idea. That was like, my dad used to teach on Revelation, and that's all he talked about was Daniel and all that, and that's, it's the last kingdom. We're waiting on that to happen. The desolation, the statue and all that type of stuff, breathing life into the statue.
Right.
Yeah. All that. It's just like, wow.
That's the crazy thing. If I'll say one more thing on Daniel chapter 9. I love the book of Daniel, by the way. It was one of my favorite books, Daniel and Isaiah. But if we go back to Daniel, at the very end of Daniel chapter 9, go to verse 27. Something very interesting happens. Christians have to go to Daniel 27 and they have to say, well, the 490 years somehow ends on Jesus, but then also it goes like another 1,000 or 2,000 years later, because they don't think verse 27 got fulfilled. It says he will make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half of the week he will make sacrifice and offering cease. Well, they think that happened when Jesus came, which it didn't really happen the way they think it did, but it says in their place there will be an abomination that desolates until, listen to this, until the decreed end is poured out upon the desolator. Well, the decreed end must be poured out upon the desolator. The desolator is the person who set up the offering. It's the person who set up the abomination. The abomination that desolates has a person that did it, and that person is called the desolator. So if that person wasn't wiped out within the 490 years, then this prophecy certainly didn't come true.
Right. So it just they're and then they're just adding a bunch of time to it, like just cutting that out, then adding a bunch of time and then saying it's going to be
Right.
Wow. Jesus Christ. I like the Desolator, though. That's pretty cool. That's sounds like a Spawn character or something. That's pretty
That'd be a really good band. Just call it the Abomination of Desolation.
Right? Oh yeah, that probably is a metal band. Now that I think about it, it's just like I don't even know why that's definitely been. Yeah, no, that's that's awesome.
There was a pretty wild metal band. Remember in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was I want to call it an anti-Christian metal band. Now I have to look up the name of it. Let's see.
Like Lamb of God. I remember them.
I'll think of it as we're talking, but there was one. Lamb of God was definitely one of them, but there was another one that was like, I don't know what the word to use for it is, but like it was like a horror band almost. Like the goal of the band was to really shock you as to what they were saying.
Oh, are you talking about Cradle of Filth?
That's it. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. I've seen them. Yeah, they're insane, man. Yeah, it's almost like a Guar kind of performance. Or it's like, whoa, okay, that's I need to see that. That's stuck in my brain now, like for all eternity. Jesus, that's awesome.
Yeah, they were wild.
Oh yeah. That's funny. Yeah, I didn't realize. I was watching one of your interviews and you said you were 40. I was like, shit, me too. We're like exactly the same age. That's too funny.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
We definitely got to grow up during an interesting time period. We caught the end of the Satanic Panic.
Yep.
Oh yeah. You know, we saw the rise of like Christian pop culture. Like a lot of Christian bands actually broke into pop culture during our time period. We had Jars of Clay and 1,000 Foot Crutch and a bunch of really good bands that actually made it mainstream. And I don't think that happens anymore. I can't think of any Christian bands that are in pop culture. Like Reliant K was real big.
Oh yeah, I seen them. Yep. Yeah, because that's funny you mentioned them. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like punk, and especially in the punk kind of subgenre was like, like MXPX and a lot of these like other Christian punk bands, and they weren't just like blanketly like dismissed, which is so funny to me now. Like looking at like what punk and stuff means to me anyway. You know, like the Bad Religion thing, like that's what I feel like it means, but anti-oppression, and those guys are like, no, oppression's great, we should be into it, whatever. You know, it's like it's but yeah, it was kind of weird. That was kind of the time period I came up in, so it's but that's so funny. That's cool. Did you when you were going to the church and stuff, were you raised like heavily indoctrinated, or were you a bit more like, did you get into it later?
So, you know, I got really lucky because my parents weren't, I would say, over religious. My mother was a non-practicing Catholic, and she kind of had the opinion that she wanted us to be exposed to Catholicism, but she never wanted to force people into believing things. And she was definitely a free thinker herself. And my father, when I was growing up, was kind of, for a while, like a back row Baptist. And it wasn't until I got a little bit older that my dad started to take his religion seriously. So, and I went to a Catholic school, so I was exposed to the religion, but it was never a thing where like my parents made me go to church, or like we went every Sunday, like we went on like holidays really. So I got into Christianity on my own in my teenage years. And it happened to me because my best friend was involved in a really cool church, and his family was very Christian. You know, they went every Wednesday, every Sunday, all the special events. And so since we were best friends, I just went with them. And it was kind of through the exposure with his family that I began to start taking it more seriously. Cause like, oh, that's, if this is true, which I believe the Bible is true, if it's true, it sounds like God is actually demanding more than just me believing in him. He actually wants me to commit my life to him. So that's what I did. And it made sense at the time. Cause like, well, if God exists and the Bible is true, then this is the most important thing ever. Right.
Right.
And then, so I started reading the Bible really heavily in my teenage years and started getting involved in various ministries and Bible studies and outreaches. And I did that for a long time. It wasn't until I went to Bible college and seminary that I found like a lot of cracks in the wall, because I started to study the Bible academically. And it turns out that a lot of what you hear about the Bible doesn't actually hold up when you study it. There's like the Bible and the mythology of the Bible. And most people know the mythology of the Bible. They don't know the actual Bible.
Right. Okay. So you didn't get caught up in like the precept type of stuff. Like that was okay. Cause that was like where I was from, raised that way, where it was like the Bible's absolute factual truth, and our interpretate there is no, it's right. We're right. And there's no interpreting anything, and so, yeah, and start with that and then moving out. But you kind of had a bit more leading into the academics of it. So you actually had to be like, no, I have to make sure this is true kind of mentality about it. Oh, so yeah, can't have that. No, that's not.
You definitely don't want.
You gotta start with it's already true, and then just decide that you're right a whole lot by tying your brain in pretzels. Jesus, no, that's which I think was probably the most frustrating part of dealing with being a Christian, was having to be like, okay, there's God's clearly bad. Like, I don't know any other way to say it. Like, and you try to just be like, oh no, but it's not bad because he's God. So it's that cancels the badness. I don't know.
So that's a really good point, because like when you see like what God gets up to, like if a human being did that, you would say, oh, that's not a good person. But when God does the thing, then you're like, oh, well, now I have to make excuses. Like I have to find a reason why it happened. And sometimes the reason doesn't always live up to the excuses. So for example, one of my favorite passages that I know apologists really struggle with is, for example, when David is punished for what he does to Bathsheba. So he basically kidnaps Bathsheba, commits adultery with her, has the husband executed, right, because she gets pregnant. And as punishment for this, God says he's going to kill his son, the son that was born to Bathsheba. And that he doesn't say 10 in 2 Samuel, but he says he's going to raise up trouble within him from his own household. And he's going to take your wives before your very eyes, and your neighbor will lie with them in broad daylight. And then that happens in chapter 16. Uh-huh. So this really weird thing happens in 2 Samuel 16, where Absalom, at war with his father, comes back, kidnaps 10 of David's wives that were left behind, and basically rapes them on top of the palace as a display of force. Now, this sounds horrible, but the worst part is not that it happened. The worst part is God said, I'm causing it to happen. I'm making it happen. And I'm doing it as a punishment to you. But like, if a human being did that, if a husband committed a sin, you said, okay, well now as punishment for your sin, I'm going to go and rape your wife, we would lock that person up. There's no way we would allow them to exist in society. But when God does it, you're like, oh, well, I mean, he had to do something. David sinned. This is a punishment for David. But the wives didn't do anything wrong. They
right. That's what I was like, wait, hold on. And it's so weird that that's the way men thought. Of course they thought that way back then. Like, the worst thing you can do is rape my wife. And it's like, wait, to you? And you're like, yeah, that's the worst thing you can do to me. No, that's the worst thing you can do to her. Like, what the fuck? But they're not people. What are you talking about? Like, that's so crazy. Right. That's like, but that's the mentality back then. But yeah, that's an evil thing. There's no way around that. That's literally forcing somebody to do what we would consider the worst thing anybody can have done to them, pretty much.
Right.
Jesus.
If you took that passage and you just changed like one or two of the names and you read it to a Christian and say, I'm going to read you a passage from the Quran, and then you read it to them, they'd be like, what a horrific God. I would never believe in a God that would do that. But the minute they realize it's in their Bible, then they're like, oh, well, I mean, God had to do it. You know, everything God does is good.
Right. Yeah. That's funny. It's the divine command thing.
Yeah.
You know, and that was like, I think that's what messed me up the most was just and I get, and I wanted to ask you about this because like I feel like this comes up a lot when we're talking about like how evil God is in the Bible and arguing for that. Do you get a lot of divine command theory stuff? Like it's good just because God did it, because otherwise we wouldn't know what right and wrong even is without a God. So it has. Is that do you get that a lot?
So when I do my debate topic, God is not good, that's like a calling card for philosophy Christians to come out of the woodwork. And most of the philosophy people will eventually fall on divine command theory. That's usually where they land because it's really the only logical conclusion of their religion. But that being said, if you don't get a philosopher that comes up to debate, if you get someone who's just like a normal Christian, a lot of times they don't know what divine command theory is. So they'll just say, well, you know, God had a reason, right? So rather than saying, well, by default, if God did it, it must be good because my philosophy says so, they'll say, well, there must be a reason that we don't know about, and you can't really question God. His ways are higher, which is not necessarily divine command theory, but it's very akin to divine command theory. It's almost the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, you could use
Yeah.
that to argue divine command theory. Just like, well, there must be something. It's, you know, mysterious fucking ways or whatever. Like, yeah.
Right.
Jeez.
So every conversation will eventually end in divine command theory realm, which is really fun because once you get them to admit that they believe in divine command theory, then you can test the logical limits of divine command theory. You can ask them ridiculous questions like, okay, so if everything God says by definition is good, you have to do it because God is good. Then if, for example, if God commanded me to go to the orphanage and round up all the babies and throw them into an incinerator, would that be a good thing? Should I do that? And they have to say yes. They have to say yes every time, or else they don't believe in divine command theory.
They were all going to grow up to be Freddy Krueger. I don't know. Shit. Like, like left with nothing. That's awesome. Yeah, that's crazy that you can get them there. And I feel like I've seen that video too. Or I say that one video. There's like probably a dozen that they've actually said, yes, of course. That's so crazy.
Then I think the final question that you would end with that conversation would be like, okay, so your theology is that if God is doing it, it must be good. But how do you actually know that the God is good? For example, if it happened to be that the God was evil, could you know it, and how would you know it? And they don't have an answer for this question because in their worldview, they've defined God as good already, and they've just assumed that, well, because God is good, that it must be good to do whatever God tells you. But if you just flip that around and says, okay, well, if the God was evil and he was telling you to do evil shit, how would you know that the God was evil? And they can't comprehend it. And it ends in, well, you couldn't actually know if God was evil, because if your knowledge of good and evil is dependent on God and God tells you to do something, then it's impossible for you to know. And then you would just end the conversation with, okay, so you personally lack the ability to know what is good and what is not good, which means you can't tell me what is good and what is not good.
Wow. That's that's a good, damn, that's crazy. Yeah. And I feel like, I don't know, because a lot of times that's like an entire ontological argument for God, isn't it? That like there's no way to know if anything is right or wrong without God.
Without God.
Yeah. If you're like an atheist, you can't say anything's right or wrong. And then yet they'll turn around and be like, well, everything God did was right just because he's right. And they're like, well, hold on. So harm has nothing to do with anything then. And they're like,
right.
Now if God does it, then it's, we don't care about harm. And, so harm, like working out feels like it hurts, right? And that leads to good things. So harm is good. It's like, holy shit, man, what is happening? Like, how do you do this? Like, it's crazy how they think. But, Jesus.
Yeah. The precept argumentation for God is based on a lot of assumptions, and they hope that you don't challenge any of the assumptions or any of the premises. because if you get them off script, they're toast. They can't handle being off script.
Have you gotten like bombed by like the Darth Dawkins or anything yet? Has he made his way to your channel? he just
He
started
tried
following
once.
me. So okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
great.
he came in one time, and Darth Dawkins is a jerk to everyone he talks to. So I don't owe him my respect. So when he first came into the stream, I think I said something akin to welcome in Dearth. And dearth was, I mean, if you know, it just means you're lacking something, right? And so it was a play on his name, Darth Dawkins. I just said welcome in Dearth, and he got so lit he started yelling at me. He left, so he only lasted like 30 seconds. He never came back.
Wow, really? Oh, that's a great tell. We need to let everybody know that you can get him before he gets going. Would be called Derp. That's awesome. Yeah, because
he was looking for a reason to run.
Oh yeah, but I could say because I feel one of the things that's difficult for me when I that's why I kind of like enjoy watching your channel is you kind of don't you're not faced by that. Maybe the way I was raised or something, like it's this people pleasing shit where you can't just not along with everybody, and so it's really hard to like push back in those kinds of conversations. Because that's the way we were raised. It was like, no, you never disagree with anybody. Just if somebody says something's true, that must be because of God or whatever. Because we were just such an insular community, like homeschooled and everything, right? So watching you, it's kind of interesting. We're just like, no, that's not true. Actually, you're wrong about that. And I was like, wow, that's cool. Like I gotta wish I could do that. Just push back. So when Darth followed me, I was like, oh fuck, man, I'm just gonna have to just troll him back. That's the only thing I can really think to do. Just because I'm like, I don't even want to get caught in the what is the thing that grounds all logic into fact. I don't fucking know. I don't care, man. Like a court, like what would ground it to a courtroom of like a jury, within a courtroom? That's the only thing I can think, to say. Like I don't know.
Well, also keep in mind when it comes to presuppositional apologetics, the argument never ends in Christianity. It ends in there's a higher power. So like if you're just bored with the conversation and you're like, listen, I don't really want to have this conversation anymore. It's a dumb conversation. Then when they first come in and start laying down, their argument, just ask them, does the conclusion of this argument end in Christianity or does it end in a higher power? Because I could accept that there could be a higher power. It might be Vishnu, it might be Brahma, it might be Marduk. Who knows who it is? It's not a problem for me to say, okay, well, maybe there is. Now, I enjoy arguing that there isn't a higher power, but to be perfectly honest, it's not inconceivable that there couldn't be one. I just don't have any evidence of it. So if you're tired of having that conversation with these apologists, just say, okay, cool, I believe there's a higher power. Now give me the argument that ends in your God being the higher power, because that's the more interesting conversation. And what you'll find with the presuppositional apologetics is they don't have an argument that ends in Christianity. The only argument they have ends in a higher power. And then once they think they've proven that there is a higher power, then they'll say, and that higher power is my God. They just smuggle their God in with it.
Right. I think my favorite is and tell me how you would respond to this, because I ask everybody this, is Ray Comfort's like one of my favorite people to mess with. He's just so funny. I don't know. I just love screwing with him. But he always says, if you're an atheist, okay, well then you believe the scientific impossibility that nothing created everything, right? Like how would you respond to that? Just out of curiosity.
Well, I think there's a couple ways you can go about that. I think you can start with the simplest syllogism on earth, which is premise number 1, something doesn't come from nothing. Premise number 2, something exists. Conclusion, there was never nothing. And it's such a simple syllogism, but it's powerful because it demonstrates that logically, if something exists, then there was never nothing. So the next question is, okay, so if there was never nothing, then what was there? And they're just going to say something like, well, it was God. God was the not nothing. But according to science, it seems to be that there was never an absence of what we would call stuff. Like matter, space, and time seems to be something that always existed, even if it was in a different form, even if it was in, cosmic inflation or quantum foam, or if it was an infinite cycle of big bangs and big crunches. I believe that, the universe that that we are a part of has always existed and will always exist in some kind of a form. It's interesting that we get to experience it at this particular point in time. But I have no reason to believe that it didn't exist. So like if you use Occam's razor, which view has, less difficult entailments and less commitments, right? The view that everything we see, the stuff that we know exists, right? We can say that the stuff that we know exists has just always existed.
Right.
Or we would say the stuff that we know exists once didn't exist, which we have no evidence of. And not only did it not exist, but a sky fairy spoke it into its existence, something we also don't have evidence for. Which one of those two viewpoints has less commitments and is easier to rationalize? It's obviously the viewpoint that the stuff that we already know exists has always existed.
Right. Okay. Yeah, no, that's a great way to put it. Because a lot of time, and what's weird is like, and I've heard people give that answer, and then he'll like switch gears to this weird, like hidden premise that everything has to be made. Right. Like he'll just go like, oh, you're telling me that like that kittens and puppies and eyeballs and stuff, and it's all like it, it all exists without something that made it. Right. And it's just kind of funny because that's the assumption is that, well, everything had to be created by something. It's as if everything has to be caused by the same thing, which is just another huge assumption. It's just like you're saying.
So yeah, you're right, because they're using the word created and they're smuggling a bunch of ideas in with it. When we say that like humans were created or a kitten was created, that's not really the right word. Like scientifically speaking, I wasn't necessarily created. Nobody sat down and assembled me. Various elements from my parents and from the earth combined to make me. But all of those elements, every atom that is in my body existed before I was born. So I didn't come out of nothing. And every atom that's in my body will go back to the earth and will eventually be something else. It might be a tree later,
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good way to put it. Like I said, like it's not because that you're right. They make it sound like everything was decided to be what it is by something, and that's just not true. Oh, just so you know, y'all, at the end, like we got a little bit longer, and then I do want to get to comments. So just I'll tell you all at the end, but I will cycle back through and look for Punk Apostate or Justin if you do either of our names, or Deconstruction Zone works too. But yeah, just so you know, I didn't want everybody to think I'm ignoring comments. I just try to put them at the end. You know what I mean? And, I mean, unless it's a super chat, I will take super chats immediately. When they come up. But those are special for some reason. But but
were there any?
Oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna ask about some of your favorite prophecies that you like to mess with.
Well, I tell you one that I haven't talked about much, but I'm going to start bringing it up more and more when I do debates. And this is Malachi chapter 4. Have you read Malachi chapter 4? Most people haven't read Malachi, but
it's been a long time. I did go through the Bible before, but it's been a really long time. I got to make my way through it again.
Right. So there's something really interesting in Malachi 4. It talks about the great day of the Lord, right? So this is when God comes and judges mankind and whatnot, right? And when you go down to verse 5, it says, "See, I will send you the prophet Elijah before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. He will turn the hearts of parents to their children and the hearts of children to their parents, so that I will not come and strike the land with a curse." So just based on a simple reading, it seems like what he's saying is that at the very end, when I come to judge mankind, I'm going to send the prophet Elijah back. Remember, Elijah didn't die, right?
Oh, right. That's right. He was taken up.
Right.
Raptured.
Yep. And he goes, I'm going to send Elijah to you guys, and he's going to turn the hearts of my people back to me in order that I don't wipe them out as well. Because I'm going to come and I'm going to wipe a bunch of people out.
Right,
you know what I mean?
Okay.
But the weird thing is when we go to the New Testament, we're told, in fact, that John the Baptist is the new Elijah. In Luke 1:17, it says, with the power and spirit of Elijah, he will go before him and turn the hearts of the parents to their children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. So they're connecting Elijah with John the Baptist, which is weird because in 70 AD, if the destruction of Jerusalem under the Romans wasn't a failure of Micah chapter 4, verse 6, I don't know what it is, because it says he's going to turn the hearts of the children back to their parents and to the Lord, so that I will not come and strike the land with a curse. But literally, the whole land got wiped out. They got completely annihilated, devastated by the Romans in 70 and again between 134 and 136, which means if John the Baptist was the Elijah, he failed. He didn't complete the prophecy.
Jesus. Oh, that's a good one. Hell yeah. That's funny.
One of my favorites, and you want to, when you talk to a Christian about this, you want to read Isaiah 61 first before you turn to what the New Testament says. But in Isaiah 61, there is a prophecy of restoration and deliverance. And as soon as I read verse 1, you're going to know exactly. It's going to trigger a memory. It's going to say, oh, yes, this is from the New Testament. It says, the Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because he has anointed me because the Lord has anointed me. He has sent me to bring good news to the oppressed and bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and release to the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn and to provide for those who mourn in Zion. It's like, okay, this is interesting. There's people in Jerusalem, in Zion, mourning. And what's this prophecy about? Verse 4, they will build up the ancient ruins. They will raise up the former devastations. They shall repair the ruined cities and the devastations of many generations. Cool. This is the restoration of Israel, right? It's very clear. That's why it says strangers will stand and feed your flocks, and foreigners will till and dress your vines. So easy enough. Cool. So Isaiah was written, this section, just after the release of the captives from the Babylonian captivity. Now he's prophesying that they're going to be restored to the way that they were before. So that's easy enough. When you go to Luke 4, though, Luke 4 completely bungles it. In fact, Jesus himself bungles it, if you believe Luke is quoting Jesus. In Luke chapter 4, it says, Jesus came to Nazareth, and where he was raised, and he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day, as was his custom, and he stood up to read the scroll of the prophet Isaiah, which was given to him, and he unrolled the scroll and found the place where it was written, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor, so on and so forth. And he quotes everything up until the day of the Lord's vengeance. He left out the day of the Lord's vengeance, or surprisingly. And then it says he rolled up the scroll and gave it back to the attendant and sat down. And the eyes of all the synagogue was fixed on him. And he began to say to them, today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. What? The day of vengeance hasn't been fulfilled in your hearing. The restoration of the land of Israel hasn't been fulfilled in your hearing. How is this fulfilled? So Jesus is just quoting a little snippet of a prophecy completely out of context and saying, oh, it's actually me.
Oh, Jesus. What? Because it's funny, because I was thinking, wasn't it? I thought it was that he, like, the fact that he read it right then or something. That's what, like, I had explained to me before. But again, from Christians.
Right.
Like, I don't know. That's funny. Okay. Yeah. And he left out the bad part, of course. Just stopped reading.
Listen to the part that he applied to himself. It says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he anointed me to bring good news to the poor, sent me to proclaim release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, which actually isn't in Isaiah. He added that part, and to set free those who are oppressed. Okay. Anyone could have done that. The section that he's saying was fulfilled by him literally could have been fulfilled by anybody. It could have been fulfilled by Simon Bar Kokhba. It could have been fulfilled by the teachings of Dositheus. It could have been fulfilled by any other early messianic figure it's weird that the part that Jesus fulfilled is the part that literally anybody could fulfill. I could have said it's about me. I could say the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. Anyone could say that they fulfilled it because it's so vague and there's no way to test it.
Right. That's the kind they love, though, right?
Yeah.
Jesus.
Prophecies are always true when the claimant makes it unfalsifiable.
Right. Oh yeah. And a lot of it seems to me to be like some kind of like post hoc hindsight bias a lot of times, just like looking at stuff and be like, this kind of lines up, after the fact. But with the New Testament too, like, couldn't they just, like, this was my thought, and I remember hearing this a lot, and the pastors and stuff would be like, man, the Old Testament was, the New Testament was written like so much like after the Old Testament. How did they know? And they wrote down and Jesus fulfilled all these prophecies. And even my little kid brain was like, couldn't you just write that you are fulfilling the prophecies that you already fucking knew about? Like, how is this hard? Like, I don't understand.
Yeah, that brings up a really good point, because the New Testament authors, when you see the prophecies that they're claiming he fulfilled, it's clear that they're just saying he fulfilled them, when in reality, if he did fulfill them, we would actually know about it, right? So, for example, if you go to Matthew 21, in Matthew 21, we've got the triumphal entry, right? And they're trying to say that, hey, when Jesus rode the double donkeys into Jerusalem, I don't know how he rode two donkeys at once. I don't know if he was planking over top of them, or if he was found a way to straddle both of them at the same time, or if he was like reclining on one of them and he had his baggage on the other. I don't know.
They were duct taped. Duct taped together. Oh, Jesus. Like, it's funny. So like, those are the donkeys with the cross on their back. That's how the cross got there.
Obviously, that's right. So Jesus is riding this donkey ostensibly into Jerusalem, while all the people are saying, save us, save us. When we read the word Hosanna in the English Bibles, that's the people saying, save us. Isn't it weird that when we read it in English, they say Hosanna rather than save us? Some translations now say save us. But that's what they're shouting. Why are they? In fact, I'm in the NRSV right now. In verse 15 says, when the chief priests and the scribes saw the amazing things that he did and heard the children crying out in the temple saying, Hosanna to the Son of David, they became angry. Why would your English translation say Hosanna? It's because they don't want you to know what they're actually shouting. They're shouting, save us. But why are they shouting, save us? Well, because if you just go back and read Zechariah 9, where the prophecy comes from, it's clearly about somebody who is a savior who's going to rescue the people. It says in verse 9, rejoice greatly, O daughter Zion, shout aloud, O daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, triumphant and victorious is he, humble and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. Now listen to verse 10. This is where they don't read this part. But it says, he will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the war horse from Jerusalem, and the battle bow will be cut off, and he will command peace to the nations, and his dominion will be from sea to sea, from the rivers to the ends of the earth. So if Jesus didn't come in and cut off the war horses and cut off the archers and cut off the chariotmen, if he didn't do those things, if he didn't rescue Israel from their war and create a kingdom of peace, then he did not fulfill Zechariah chapter 9. And that's what should have happened if he did. That's why people were shouting, save us. Because in the prophecy, it wasn't that there was just a guy riding a donkey. I rode a donkey. I'm not the Messiah.
Right.
The point was there's supposed to be a king riding a donkey who is going to rescue them from the hands of their enemies. And that didn't happen.
Yeah, it was like a military leader, right?
Yeah.
It's funny because, and it's so funny you bring that up, because I remember, and I'm trying to think of a good example, like a movie or something, where you think that they were like, oh no, that's just what they thought. That's what I always heard. And then when it actually happened, they all got the prophecy wrong. And it's just like in the movie where they think one thing's going to happen, then something else. They're like, oh, that was the prophecy the whole time. And it was like, everybody was thrown off or whatever.
Right.
yeah, no, obviously it was like talking about, because they're like, oh no, symbolically saving them like from their sins or whatever. Like, come on, man, that's so fucking stupid. Like, there's no way.
Yeah. Well, that was the excuses I got when I was in Catholic school, because I asked my religion teacher, what's probably my freshman year or my sophomore year, I think. And I asked her, how is it that the Jews didn't recognize Jesus as the Messiah? Because if Jesus was supposed to be the Jewish Messiah, then it kind of feels like God did something wrong, or the Jews were just not very bright. Like, what's happening here? And she gave a really blanket cliche answer. And I know you've heard it, which is like, well, they were expecting the Messiah to be a king. They were expecting to be, but God actually sent somebody that they weren't expecting. And which raises a really interesting point, was like, well, why? Why would God tell them to expect X, Y, and Z? And then he sent somebody that didn't fit X, Y, and Z. That seems like a bait and switch, right?
Yeah, it's a fucking wishmaster thing. Like, it's like,
Yeah.
oh, your wish means this other thing over here, and it's like, what the fuck? Why are you tricking? Why are you playing games, man? Like, just
Right.
we just don't tell us to expect anything. Then, Jesus, like, it's
Right.
so weird. Yeah, that's funny.
And so, but these are the type of apologetics that you have to engage in when you're doing apologetics. You have to say, well, the words don't mean what the words mean, right? If you actually stick to what the text says and say, listen, when it says things, I'm inclined to believe that these words mean typically what the words mean, right?
Right.
Well, then it's pretty clear that Jesus just he wasn't the Messiah. He didn't fulfill anything. And to me, I think it's dishonest. Like, I'm not willing to be that dishonest with the text and say, well, actually, as long as you change the meaning of all these words, then it actually came true. Like, you wouldn't accept that for any other book. You wouldn't accept it for the Quran. You wouldn't accept it for the Bhagavad Gita. You wouldn't accept it for the Book of Mormon. Like, if you took the Book of Mormon and just started reinterpreting the words of the Bible, saying, oh, this is actually about Joseph Smith, like, you wouldn't accept that. The average Christian would say, no, you have to look at the context. You have to look at what the words actually mean. And it's like, isn't it weird that when it comes to your Messiah, the words mean nothing? When it comes to everybody else who claims to be special, then you want to look at the context. Then you're like, oh no, these words have definitive meanings.
Right. Yeah. It's almost like, it's funny you said that, because I always remember like parts where they would sit there and just act like it didn't say, like, what was a good one? Oh, like when Jesus said, you gotta like hate your like, I didn't come to bring peace to the story. You gotta hate your, I'm gonna, hate your father and mother, whatever.
Right.
And they'd be like, that's not what he meant. Now he meant comparatively. As much as you love your dad, you'd hate your dad compared to how much you love Jesus. And you're like, what the fuck? How did you get that, man? That's insane. That's the weirdest interpretation ever. What the fuck?
Yeah. And it comes from, so the argumentation for what you're referring to is, there was I forget the name of the guy who came up with it, but basically he noticed that in the Greek Septuagint, it talks about Rachel and Leah, and it says, typically it says something akin to like, one was loved and one was not loved, or sometimes it'll say one was hated, one was loved. Same thing with Jacob and Esau. One was loved, one was hated.
Right. Okay. Huh.
And so what you get though is that in the Greek Septuagint, the way that they translated it from Hebrew into Greek, then it takes a little bit of a softer tone. It could be read as though one was loved and one was loved less, or one wasn't loved.
Almost meh. Just meh.
Yeah, rather than hated, right?
Right.
Hated. But so what they do then is they'll say, well, look, the New Testament was written in Greek, and when we look at the way the Greek was used in the Old Testament, you can soften it from hate to not hate, right? But I don't think that's a good reading of the text, because in the Old Testament, we have context, right? I don't think it's wise to conclude that one of the wives was hated and one was loved. I think it's okay to say, given the context that we have and the semantic range that we have, it's okay to say that one was loved and one was loved less. But typically 9 times out of 10, the word that is used that we have typically means to hate. And especially when you turn to the Hebrew text. When you turn to the Hebrew text, it's definitely the way that it's used is referring to hating somebody.
Huh.
So, like, it's just a weird play on words that they're going with. If you look at the straight definition of the Greek words that are used in the New Testament, it doesn't mean love less. It means to hate. They're just going back into the Old Testament and saying, okay, can I find any words in here that would give me wiggle room? And that's the
Right.
best argument they have.
Oh, they love doing that too. That's when we just gets really irritating because they'll like look up words in the Greek and Hebrew and stuff, and they're like, well, if you look this way, and like go to like the blueletterbible.com and stuff, and then it just gives them all this like room to like equivocate and stuff and change all
Right.
sorts of stuff. You could pull anything out of shit if you just
Yeah.
keep on changing, going back in old languages and stuff. It's crazy.
So that's actually a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up because, in fact, I got a Hebrew dictionary here. Hold on. So, in like a typical Brown Driver Briggs Hebrew dictionary, what you'll find is they do, like, if you look up, just any word. So I've got the word here is mul, meaning to circumcise, right? Well, as it turns out, this is it means to cut off, really.
Oh God.
Right? It means to snip.
God, I hope that they got that, what to snip specific, because geez, I could
So
go back,
like
but-
what you find is like a lot of these words have a semantic range. Like they could be used in multiple ways. So you might ask yourself, okay, so that means I can just go into the text and find a meaning of the word that I like. But that's not true, right? Because as it turns out, it depends on how the word is conjugated, and how it's used contextually tells you how the word is to be interpreted. You can't just go to a dictionary and be like, oh, well, this word could also mean this, and it could also mean that. Therefore, I'm going to pick the thing that I like best. That's not how translation works. What you do is you pick the word that fits what the context of the passage is telling you and how it's grammatically structured. So, for example, if you go to like a typical word in the Hebrew Bible, you'll find, and I'll see if I can find one here in the dictionary that gives a good explanation of how the conjugation matters, right?
Right.
So, for example, here's a verb. Okay, so we got a verb, malal. Also, it means to circumcise, but you'll find that it shows up in various roots, various verbal stems. It shows up in a call stem and the fall stem, and also here they've got it listed in the hithpael stem. And so these are various ways to conjugate a word. And in biblical Hebrew, like you might have a root word. One of the first words you'll learn in biblical Hebrew is katal. Katal means to kill, and it's used because it's a good, strong verb. It doesn't have any consonants that drop off when you conjugate it. And as it turns out, in the call stem, in the Hebrew verbal stem, to kill just means to kill. It's generic. When you put it into a nafal stem, it means to be killed. When you put it into like a PL stem, it means to slaughter, right? So the ways that you conjugate a word determines how it gets used in the sentence, because to be killed and then to slaughter somebody else are obviously two different things. So people want to go to like a Strong's Concordance and be like, oh, well, the word can mean so many things. I'm just going to pick the one that I like. But no, Hebrew and Greek are contextual languages, and you need to know the grammar. Once you know the grammar and once you know the context, then you know how the author is using the word. And so when you find people that are just going to the Strong's Concordance and trying to find alternative ways of rendering the word, these people have no idea how the language works. Typically, the Greek and the Hebrew scholar that translated it, they probably got it right. There are very few occasions, I think, where they got it wrong. And typically where they get it wrong, it's because they've got personal bias, like they might be a Christian and they want it to be translated more Christian-like rather than what is, more proper in translating it. So, but typically 9 times out of 10, guess what? Just some guy in a Bible study with a Strong's Concordance has no idea how a word should be used. Trust the scholars, trust a guy with a PhD who translated the text, And sometimes there's difficult texts where the scholars themselves don't even agree on what should be there. And you have to allow for a little bit of gray area there as well. But the minute somebody comes to me saying they know what the original text actually says, and the scholars got it wrong, even though they have no education, they don't know the original languages, then you could just laugh them out of the building.
Right. Because as far as I understand, like the Hebrew language has far fewer words, or is it right? It's far fewer words, and that's why it really depends on the
in fact,
context.
If you only know about 800 to 1,000 Hebrew words, you can read over 90% of the Hebrew Bible. Now there are lots of other words in biblical Hebrew. You know, there are thousands of words in biblical Hebrew, but a lot of them are rare. They only show up a couple times in the text. There's a lot of words that only show up 4 or 5 times. So if you only memorize, we'll say, memorize the first 500 words in order of how frequently they occur in the Bible. If you can do that, if you can memorize just 500 words and understand the conjugation, you can actually read. I've got, for example, on the shelf behind me, hold on.
Just doing the Westhoff again. See, Joe Rogan, dude, we got our own Westhoff.
This is a copy of the Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia Reader's Edition. So this is a critical edition of the Hebrew text. And what you'll find in this edition, they've got the rare words, the less common words, for you in the bottom. It'll tell you what the root word is, right? Because if it's a word that only shows up once, twice, 3, 4 times in the Bible, you might not know it when you read it, right? So if you only know the first 500 to 600 words in the Hebrew language that as they show up in the Bible, you can pick up a reader's edition of the Bible and pretty competently read it. That's how few words you need to know to read the Bible. Now, if you want to be like an actual exegete, if you want to exegete the scriptures, then you have to have a pretty good handle on the language. And you also probably want to have some really good resources available to you, like some really fine lexicons, like the Hallet, the Hebrew Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament, because like even with my training, like I would still be considered an amateur with the biblical languages, despite the fact that I can pick up a Hebrew Bible and typically read it. Because some of the words are so nuanced, right? Like there are words that only show up in a particular verbal stem. And if you're not a real professional with the language, if you didn't do a PhD, or if it's not your primary language, you might not realize that, oh, well, this word doesn't need to be translated differently because it shows up in this verbal stem. It just happens to be that the word most commonly just gets used in that verbal stem. And that's something that an expert would know, whereas an amateur like me would have to look up.
Oh, wow, that's crazy. So there is a lot of room, or they believe there's a lot of room to mess around there. But
yeah,
if you know what you're doing, there's actually not.
I like the way you put that. Yeah, if you actually know the language, there's not as much wiggle room as you think there is.
See, I feel like too, it's funny because I feel like a lot of times, and this is what I think makes a lot of lazy thinkers out of religious folks and pastors and stuff, is they'll read the same story a bunch of times and then go back and like look up the words in Hebrew and Greek and stuff just so they can be like, hey, there's this other thing that applies to my life personally that I can, and it's just kind of, you know what I mean? Like, oh, it's like God showed me that just right now. It's the living word, and so. Right. But that's I don't know. I just think that creates lazy thinking because it's like, go figure something that's real out, man. Like, go learn like an actual thing instead of just like, oh, I decided I found a code inside the fucking whatever, It's just kind of sad.
Right.
But Jesus.
Yeah, Bible codes are the funniest topics. And my father kind of dabbled in Bible code for a little bit. But this idea that God has given you hidden messages in the Bible, like if you just take the first letter of every word that shows up in Isaiah chapter 16, you'll find a hidden message. But right. The irony of Bible codes, and we already talked about it a little bit, is that every text of the Hebrew Old Testament has a dozen variants. We have no idea what the first letter of the first word is in every, like, we don't know what was.
Yeah, you could not go by that. That's funny. Shit. Oh my God. That's hilarious. Plus, you got, I mean, because I've seen people try to do that today with like and it's like, which translation, man? Because like, and not even that, like, I mean, there's just, you got the King James, the New King James, like, there's just so many versions. And even, I don't know, I feel like even if you put like a New King James next to another one, they still change them at some time, like new editions.
Right.
It's fucking
Right.
weird. But they,
and I do like the New King James. Like, if you want a translation that is attempting to be as literal as possible with the text, I think the New King James does a pretty good job. My only complaint with the New King James is that they still attempt to preserve Christological readings rather than giving it a good translation, because there's a motive, you know. And then the only other problem is, you know, if you buy a New King James Bible, they still don't have the Apocrypha books. And like, if you really want to know what's happening in the New Testament and know your history, you need the Apocrypha books. Even if you don't think they're scripture, buy a Bible with the Apocrypha in it and get familiar with it, because it shows up elsewhere in the Bible. Like the idea of giving alms, right? We talk about people in the New Testament. It says that even though they weren't Jews, they were very prayerful, and they gave alms. They were still righteous because they gave alms. Like, well, what the hell is giving alms? That's not in the Old Testament. You'll never find that there, but it's all over the works of the Apocrypha. So like, we have a bunch of these concepts that show up in the New Testament that don't show up until the intertestamental period, and you won't know about them unless you read the Apocrypha.
And what? So who decided? Like, what does make the Apocrypha? Like, what kicked that out of it? Like, what happened there? Was it the Council of Nicaea, or like what was it?
That's actually a really good question. So what happened with the Apocrypha is it was basically considered scripture for the early church until the time of Jerome. Jerome was the first person that came through and was like, I don't know, I've got questions, I got doubts.
Right. Okay.
So, for example, I documented on my website a number of years ago. It took me months and months and months to get through it. All of the quotations from the early church fathers up until Jerome on the Apocrypha, and all of them describe the Apocrypha as being from God, as being prophetic, as being from the Holy Spirit. And it's not until Jerome that you get this idea that people are questioning it. And even up until the Reformation, all the Bibles had the Apocrypha. The earliest codices of the Bible, like the Sinaiticus and whatnot, included the Apocrypha. The early church fathers even tried to argue that the Apocrypha were prophecies the Jews were trying to take out. So Justin Martyr actually argued that the Jewish people were removing the Apocryphal books from their canon because it prophesied about Jesus.
Oh,
and
that's clever.
Yeah, right.
Clever little move there for the Christians.
So
funny.
I've got, let me grab. This gem right here is a King James Bible from the year 1823. So this is a King James Bible. And in my King James Bible from 1823, it still includes the Apocrypha.
Nice. Oh, cool. And it's labeled as such. Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
The Apocrypha was not removed from Bibles until the late 1800s. Up until just our modern era, virtually every Christian Bible contained the Apocrypha. They started to do funny things with them, with the Apocrypha during the Reformation period. Like, they would want to like put it at the end of the book. So like Martin Luther was like, maybe we'll just put these at the end of the Bible as extra reading. But they still kept them. You know what I mean?
Right. Okay.
And the early church, if you go to their councils, the early church said that they were supposed to be included as well. So if you go to the Council of Laodicea in between 363 and 364. It names a number of books that are recognized as a part of the Old Testament that are a part of the Apocrypha. So it names Baruch, and also names the Epistle of Jeremiah as being canonical. In the Council of Rome, as decreed afterward by Pope Damascus in 382, he includes the Book of Wisdom. That's the Wisdom of Solomon. He includes the Book of Sirach. He includes the Book of Judas and the Book of First and Second Maccabees. And then the Council of Hippo in 393 includes the Book of Maccabees, both 1 and 2, includes Tobit, Judith, and I think those are the only deuterocanonical books. In the Council of Carthage, the Third Council in 397, they include Tobit, Judith, the books of Esdras, First and Second Esdras, and the first 2 book of Maccabees. In the Council of Carthage in 419, they include the book of Maccabees. They include the extra books of Ezra. They include Tobit and Judith, and the books of the extra Daniel editions and whatnot. So, like in all of these early councils, they're like, here are the books. This is the books of the Old Testament. So this idea that like they weren't accepted by the early church and they weren't canonical according to the church councils is just not true.
That's wild. Yeah, because I was always taught that they were like like, were they Catholic? I can't remember exactly what they said. They were like, oh, that's not our thing. We don't believe those books. It's either Jewish or Catholic. Because I thought Maccabee, isn't that like where the Hanukkah comes from? Isn't that the Hanukkah story? If I'm not mistaken. Okay. Yeah, so it might have been the Jewish. They're like, that's Jewish stuff. We don't deal in that. And so yeah, it's just interesting that to me, I didn't ever realize that it was even there until literally a few years ago. So he was like, oh yeah, there's other books of the Bible called the Apocrypha. I was like, what? And I thought maybe it was it had to do with like the the gospel, or the the infant gospel of Thomas, and shit like that, right? That's what kind of what I thought was in line with all that, but that's completely different, right?
Yep. So the infancy gospel of Thomas, the infancy gospel of James, and some of the other apocryphal works, those are not part of the Old Testament Apocrypha. Those are considered New Testament Apocrypha, and those were never necessarily considered canonical for the Christians, but they were authoritative. Like this idea that Mary was a perpetual virgin. Well, those come from the works we just cited. The idea that she was assumed into heaven, like she didn't die an earthly death. Those comes from the apocryphal New Testament works. So we have these doctrines that made it into the church that are part of the apocryphal works, even though they didn't include the Apocrypha as officially canonical.
Wow. Okay. That's crazy. I didn't know they were authoritative. That's so funny. So like the where Jesus is like Dennis the Menace, like killing his teachers and bringing them back and shit. That was like, yep, he did that. That's crazy. He was perfect.
Thomas.
Yeah. So it's a good moral thing to kill your teacher sometimes. And then he brought him back. He brought him back. It's cool. Jesus, and that's wild.
Some of the other ones too. So think about everyone in Christianity believes that Peter was crucified upside down, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So we get that story from the apocryphal works of Peter. It goes by various names. Some people will call it the Gospel of Peter, but it is what it is. Basically, what happens in this testament is there's basically a duel between Simon Magus, the magician, and Peter. And in the story, there's like these lengthy speeches about how Simon Magus is going to be judged by God. But these speeches are being given once by a dog. A dog is empowered to speak. And another speech comes from a baby nursing at his mother's teat. Oh, and then later in the book, Simon Magus and Peter get into a wizard's duel, and Simon flies through the air, and Peter strikes him down from midair, and he falls and breaks his hip. And so it's just this crazy, fanciful story where there's talking dogs and babies and flying people. And this is how we learn Peter was crucified upside down. So Christians are they'll swear up and down, oh, Peter was crucified, he was martyred upside down. We know it because church history told us. But the same book talks about talking babies and dogs. So yeah, forgive me if I don't buy into the story of Peter being crucified upside down.
Right. Oh, that's so funny. Oh my God. I didn't know. So now we get to add a dog to so there's a snake, a donkey, and now a dog. Jeez,
That's right.
it's like, good God, that's hilarious. And the baby thing's hilarious too. That's just fun to think about, actually. Just some
Right.
authoritative thing. What did they say he had a low voice, or was it a high squeak? I didn't know the details here. This is very important.
That's a good question. Yeah, didn't really say what his voice was like, but he basically spoke with the same force as one of the Old Testament prophets.
Wow. Oh God, that's so good. Somebody needs to make that into a movie or something. God,
I would love for some of the apocryphal works of the disciples to get made into movies. It'd be wild. So there's a book you can get at sometimes Barnes and Nobles. They sell it at Books A Million. You can get it online really easy. It's called The Other Bible, and it's full of Old Testament and New Testament writings that didn't actually make it into the Bible, but were widely read in the early church. And you can find like most of the apocryphal New Testament works that we're talking about. Most of them will be in there. You'll find the Acts of Peter. You'll find the Acts of Andrew. Different stories like that. The Acts of Paul and Thecla will be in there. So like if you want to read some of these fanciful stories that like everyone in the early church knew about them, get yourself The Other Bible. I think I don't know. I paid less than $30 for mine. It might be over $30 now, but it's worth every penny.
hell yeah, that's awesome. Because I was just gonna ask, is that wasn't there one that was like the Apocalypse of Peter, and that was like before Revelation or something, and then was Revelation like added fairly? Now we're in the New Testament stuff. I'm sorry. I know that's not exactly your field.
Well, I agree with there's a really great scholar named Josephine Ford. She was a teacher at Notre Dame for a while. She wrote the commentary on Revelation for the Yale Anchor Bible series. And she believes that the book of Revelation was written in segments, like it wasn't all written at once. And I agree, actually. I think the book of Revelation was written in sections. And I think there is maybe a core section, a small part of it that could have come before 70. But I think most of it was probably written in the 90s.
Huh.
And
it's like the Green Mile just came out in the little oh, that's cool. That's wild.
So I think it was written over time
by the same person. It was the same dude
by different people.
Oh,
right?
That's okay. Wow. Yeah, because and from what I understand, it was like really obvious that it's not the same John, right? Like it's the John that wrote John is not the John that wrote Revelation, because like he forgot the language a few times, as far as I understand, right? Like, I mean, I know he's been on an island starving to death and eating shrooms and shit, probably, but like you usually don't forget the language that you speak, even if you're tired and tripping. So I don't know.
The early church fathers suggested that it was written by the hand of a guy named John the Elder, who was known to the early church, as opposed to John the disciple. But there were still other voices that disagreed. There were certainly people in the early church that did believe it was from John the disciple. But I just find that unlikely, because if we imagine John the disciple as a young man during Jesus' time period, let's say, for example, that he was, 20, right? So that means he was probably born, around 5 to 10 AD, because Jesus was born in 4 BCE, theoretically. So if he was 10 years younger than Jesus, that means he would have been born in the first decade, or at the end of the first decade of the turn of the telling of time there. So that means he would have been, when he wrote Revelation, he would have been like, in his 80s when he was theoretically writing. I don't know. And I just find it unconvincing that an 80-year-old man on his deathbed is out on an island writing a book in a language that he probably didn't have any training in. And I don't know, it just, the whole thing's fanciful to me. A lot of people didn't live to that age back then. And the ones that did live to that age, I don't know if they had a lot of vigor, and a lot of them already lost their eyesight. Remember, they didn't have glasses.
Oh, right. Yeah. How would he? Oh, yeah. That's an excellent point. How would he see to do the writing? And he was in
Right.
prison too, right? Like you're saying, he was like in prison on Patmos.
Right.
That's funny. There was a movie made. Actually, it was I think it was called John of Patmos. And do you remember the old Herbie movies?
The Love Bug.
Love Bug. Yeah, it was the guy that drove the Love Bug, the main character, and he was all old and everything and had like a big beard, and it was just him in just one room. It was more like a play actually, but that's what it was supposed to be. It was him like writing the book. And now that I go back and think about it, that's so absurd to like think about him sitting there like writing this book without, the ability to see at the age that he was at. It just doesn't make any sense at all.
Right. Remember, he's been exiled. He's on a prisoner's island, and somehow he's got writing material. Okay.
Right.
Somehow he learned to write. And not only that, but like he's not, apparently arthritis hasn't set in. His eyes are all still good. And like I don't know, the whole thing seems implausible to me. I agree with the early church that it was written by a different John, and I don't really know of any scholars. I mean, I'm sure they exist, but I don't know of many scholars that believe it was written by the actual John.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, here, let me see if we got some. If anybody wants to ask any questions, we got Justin here. We're about to wrap up in a minute, so you can. I'm going to cycle back through and just take a look in case I missed something. I've been having the computer with the comments keeps on like shorting out on me or something. I'll probably have to do an update or something. But there was one I saw, and I was like, damn it, I wanted to ask.
Your mic sounds really good. What kind of mic are you using?
I actually, hold on. I think it's just it was one of my band mics. It's just it's just a regular mic. It's not even a condenser or anything, and it just goes straight into my my little PreSonus. It was like a little set that I got, but I had already had a couple microphones from playing music and stuff, and I was really surprised that it worked. I was like, I thought it would have to be a different kind or something, but no, it worked pretty good. It was pretty cool. Yeah. But I know what I wanted to ask you too, real quick. How do you like the studio? You use the studio on TikTok, right?
Yeah, so I'm using two applications at the same time. So I first fire up Streamlabs. They've got their own like version of OBS. Now you could use OBS. OBS will do everything Streamlabs will do. The reason why I use Streamlabs is because when I first started streaming, I had like this old piece of junk computer, and Streamlabs will take your stream and it basically uploads it to a server, and then their server will distribute it everywhere you need it to be. If you use OBS, OBS will create a new internet connection for every place you want to stream it, and then it doubles your stream for every location. So if you're streaming it in HD to 5 different locations, buddy, you better have an insane internet connection, because it's going to take up 100% of your bandwidth. So Streamlabs cuts down on that. It only takes one stream, and then it multiplies it for you. So that's why I use Streamlabs, is because I don't want it to destroy my computer setup as I'm streaming.
I gotta update. Because I'm like, because I know this has got to be like old. StreamYard is just, it's because I'm like, I have the hardest time with technology stuff. I'm just like, show me where to go, what button is go, and that's it. That's all I do. Usually, and that's kind of StreamYard. It's good for that. Like,
now,
here's a good
once you get Streamlabs or OBS running, you can turn on the virtual camera, and then you can open up TikTok Studio, And when you add a camera to TikTok Studio, just add your virtual camera. So everything that's on your OBS screen will now be on your TikTok Studio screen, and you can press play on both of them and stream to every place you want it to, and also stream it to TikTok. And that way you can stream to all locations.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, because StreamYard doesn't do TikTok. It's not available as one of the places it can go.
Nope.
It's fucking stupid. But this one came up early on.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Kari asked, does Justin know if there were Hebrew people mining ores in their own culture outside of slavery under other cultures? Are you familiar?
So yeah, the mining industry was pretty abundant in ancient Israel. Give me a second. I'm going to pull open a person that you guys want to look up. So there's a connection between copper mining and copper smelting in connection with people that worship Yahweh. So there's a theory that Yahweh actually originated as a god of metallurgy from a people near the land of Midian / Moab. And the guy that's kind of pushing the theory is Dr. Nassim Amzalag. And so he writes on this topic, and a bunch of people have written on it now. In fact, if you go to like Academia EDU, you can find a bunch of papers that are written on this topic. So there's definitely a connection between the Yahwistic religion and its original origin as being tied to the land of Edom. In fact, we find this even in some of the Psalms. It talks about how God originated from Mount Seir. In fact, let me grab that Psalm real quick because it's a really good one. I think it shows up in Deuteronomy as well, if I remember correctly. It says yeah. Let's see. I'm going to just Google the passage because I can't remember it.
Oh, yeah. All right.
Oh, yeah. Judges 5:4-5 also has it, right? And Deuteronomy 32:4. These are the passages that these should help you kind of understand what I'm getting to. The oldest substrata of the Hebrew Bible seems to think that God originated from the land of Midian / Edom. In Judges 4:5, it says, Yahweh, when you went out from Seir and you marched against the region of Edom, the earth trembled and the heavens poured. And then in Deuteronomy 33:2, it says, the Lord came from Sinai and dawned from Seir upon us, and he shone forth from Mount Paran. And this idea that Yahweh originated from the southeastern Levant and then made his way into the Levant as a deity seems to coincide with the idea that he was once a small regional deity that moved into Judea and then from Judea to the rest of Israel.
Oh, you went corporate. It's just a small business, and then yeah, that's crazy. That's really interesting. Yeah, because like we were talking about before the show started, they said like Billy Carson would say that they had copies, right? But a lot of it was like coming from earlier stuff, but not in the sense of like copying it. It was just like cultural norms from that time, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, these are shared ideas. Anyone interested in this might also want to look into the Midianite hypothesis. If you do like a search for any scholarly articles on the Midianite hypothesis, you'll come up with a lot of really good research on this.
Midianite hypothesis. Oh yeah, cool. Need to check that out.
I think the general consensus of the Midianite hypothesis is that, you know how Moses first encounters Jethro in Midian, his father-in-law? The general idea is that Yahweh was originally a deity in Midian, and Moses was introduced to Yahweh when he met the Midianites, when he married into the Midianites. And that was the origin of Yahwism to these Israelites or these Canaanites.
Huh. That's fascinating. Holy shit. Yeah, here's one. Let's see. It said, Pokemon say, what do you think of weak atheists? Are they doing a disservice to the cause? No violence, by the way. For both of us, right? I would say I think it's fine. I honestly like the atheist position more because I feel like that one I'm still would identify as atheist, but I think just the concept of atheist as being, I guess it's a really seen as a strong atheist perspective. But like just the fact that everybody kind of has their own interpretation of what they think God is, and it seems to be just each individual. It's just very individualistic. So it's like I think that's a good position. And I think it's weird to have to say that I'm agnostic to it because I don't feel like I should have to. I'm like, you need to demonstrate that the thing that you believe in is true or not. Saying that I don't know if a God exists or not to me is kind of, it doesn't feel like a cop out, but it just feels weird. I don't know. I feel like I shouldn't have to do that because each person, again, has their own thing. So I'm like, how am I supposed to know what every other person believes in and then say, I don't know, the thing that they subjectively interpret could be real or could not be, but I don't even know what the hell it might be. And it just feels weird to me. What do you think, Justin?
Well, to directly enter, I would say I don't know if weak atheism is a disservice to the cause, because as far as I can tell, I think atheism, if I assume it has a cause, I think it's not proving that God doesn't exist. As far as I can tell, atheism is combating these like known religions like Christianity, Islam, different things like that. Like I don't know if the goal of atheism is to demonstrate that there absolutely isn't a God, but I would say that most atheists have a goal of demonstrating that the established religions are just not true and that they're dangerous and they're harmful. And if that is a goal that most atheists have in common, then I think both the weak and the strong atheists can share that goal. We can all say Islam is harmful, Christianity is harmful. The caste system that was developed out of the Hindu faith is harmful. I don't have to say that I know there's not like a demiurge. I know there's not a deistic God in order for me to say Christianity is not true and it is harmful. So, but that's my particular viewpoint. I think it's hard to say. I don't want to say that all atheists have the same goal or we're all fighting for the same cause. But if I had to say there was a common cause, I think the common cause would show the dangers and the harm of standardized religions.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I agree. Because and they are harmful. I mean, I feel like that kind of thinking is just harmful in general. Like I always just try to like broaden it not only from religion but to like conspiracy thought, and all that type of stuff too. Because it just feels like it's almost the same thing. It's just like it's your religious thinking to the next degree. It's like that thought, like their religious thinking is just still thinking stuff from beyond their religion, and that's why they can't seem to figure out like how reality works.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
it holds back society. Remember in the 90s when the religious right were fighting against stem cell research? But
right.
why? Oh, so much. We've got so much medical advancements that came from stem cell research. Could you imagine how far along we would be if they weren't fighting against it the whole time?
Yeah, all because it was like there were a couple cells from the 70s or something.
Yeah.
Like from an abortion way back the fuck when. And it wasn't like because they were thinking about it like, oh, they're doing abortions on purpose so they can get those
Right.
cells. And it was like, that's not how it works at all.
Nope.
It's so frustrating.
They cultured those cells in a laboratory for years. They came from one original source and they cultured them over and over again. It wasn't like they were just constantly buying dead babies from abortion clinics.
That's like, of course, their minds. That's so funny. Yeah, it's like, can I get a couple dead babies, please? And I got some science in to do. Jesus.
Right. It's also true that you can extract stem cells without killing the entity as well. That's another thing. But
oh, wow. I didn't know that. Huh.
Like you don't. Yeah. There's a couple ways to get stem cells. It's easier when they're dead because they can't. You can take as many as you want.
Right.
But
yeah, there's quite a few. It's like Jesus. That's funny.
But yeah, I agree with you. I think religion is holding back progress.
Oh yeah, big time. I mean, and now it almost feels like we're literally moving backwards.
Right.
Just because I feel like it's like we should be so far along. There's so much information at our fingertips. Like I learned like nothing growing up because I was like homeschooled. So most of the information that I've gained has been as an adult and within the past 10 years when I deconverted and I was like, oh, I should go learn real things instead of just reading
Right.
a book over and over. You know what I mean? And so I've learned so much just for like, content like yours as well as other shows, plus just the internet being a thing. But the problem is it's the noise is almost getting cranked up just as loud as the real
Yeah.
information. And it's like I think that's almost like the people that want there to be more noise than information. They're kind of winning right now, what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like crazy. We
Well,
didn't have a Department of Truth or something in a future administration of some sort, like a Department of Evidence. I don't know, fucking something to point to.
did you see just recently Trump announced a new task force to weed out anti-Christian sentiment, and you're never going to guess who's heading up the task force.
Oh shit, who?
Freaking Paula White.
Oh god,
So
what? The strike lady?
not only are like the dumbest voices in the room getting clout, they're basically in charge now.
Oh, that's terrifying. Jeez,
I know it's
Louise.
bad. It's going to be a rough 4 years. I'm strapping in. I'm buckling in.
Right, because I mean, honestly, how long is it before they start to say that like channels like yours and mine are hate speech?
Right.
That's what I was just thinking
Yep.
about the other day. I'm like, holy shit, dude! If they get that, like, because I think Hemet Meta was, I hadn't had a chance to watch it, but I saw that he had that as the title of a video, and that's exactly the thought that came to my mind when I saw they were trying to weed out anti-Christian bias. I'm like, oh fuck! It's like as if we need that. It's like the most powerful religion on the planet, and we gotta weed out anti-Christian bias. My God,
It's wild.
Yeah.
If Iran created a task force to weed out anti-Muslim bias, the Western world would be like, oh my God, look how horrific they is. They can't have free speech. But when it happens here, Christians are like, yes, let's force everybody into our religion.
Right. It's so weird. Anytime that, like, it's funny you say it that way, because that's always what I try. Because like talking to my family and stuff like that, they never seem to understand like why like I don't want we don't want your religion pushed on people in like public schools and
Right.
stuff. And I always have to use that. It's sad that I have to use their bigotry against it and be like, if you wouldn't want a Muslim doing it, don't do it. You know what I mean? That's kind of my like, if you don't want a Muslim forcing your kid to pray at public school, then don't force people to pray to the Christian God at public school. It's crazy. But and they're like, oh, I guess you're okay. I guess I could see it a little bit. Okay, good. But it's crazy that you have to put it in those terms. It's like,
yeah,
Jesus. But,
it's wild, but we're gonna get through it.
Yeah, we'll make it. We always do. I think if nothing else, this will cause a major pushback. I think, hopefully, that's what I'm.
That was my thought. Actually, I agree with you. I think the pendulum always swings, and eventually it comes back. I think we're going to swing one way to the hard right. People are going to rebel against it, and then we'll swing back the other way.
Yeah, and then start making progress in that direction. Yeah, it's
That's right.
crazy. Well, thank you so much, man, for coming on. This was a lot of fun.
I had a great time. I really appreciate you having me on. I enjoyed talking to you. Hopefully we'll get some opportunities to do it again in the future. And thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, yeah, you bet. Yeah. And if, I mean, I know pretty much everybody knows where to find you, but like, where does everybody find you?
So I'm on like almost all platforms except for X right now under Deconstruction Zone. On TikTok, it's deconstruction.zone. On YouTube, it's deconstruction_zone. But if you just go to your typical search engine and type in Deconstruction Zone Justin, I'll pop up. You'll find me somewhere. So,
oh yeah, right. Well, thanks again, man, and thank you all for watching. This was a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
And we will see y'all next time. Take it easy.